"Ma'am, final warning, hands where I can see them," the young SWAT officer barked, his voice tight with adrenaline. Linda Tanner, 65, her hands full of groceries, fumbled, her arthritic fingers slow to comply. "Non-compliant subject," he yelled, then fired his taser. Roy Tanner, 68, her husband, a decorated but unassuming retired Special Forces Master Sergeant, watched in horror as his wife convulsed and collapsed. As 3 rifles then aimed at him, Roy didn't scream, didn't run. He rose slowly, looked the SWAT commander dead in the eye, and uttered 5 quiet words. "Call General Rourke, right now." Every weapon froze. If you believe true authority doesn't need to shout, type respect below. Roy Tanner was the kind of man who blended into the quiet suburban landscape of Oakwood Drive. His neighbors knew him as the friendly retiree who could fix any lawnmower, always had a kind word, and whose garage often echoed with the sounds of classic rock and tinkering. At 68, his hands, though still strong, bore the roadmap of a life lived hard. Calluses from tools, yes, but also faded scars from things best left unsaid. Few knew that beneath the unassuming exterior was Master Sergeant Roy Tanner, U.S. Army Special Forces, retired, a man who had operated in shadows, led teams through impossible situations, and whose service record was filled with commendations for valor in operations whose names were still classified. He preferred it that way. The quiet life with his wife, Linda, was a hard-won peace. Linda, his rock for 43 years, knew the nightmares, understood the silences, and had helped him navigate the long road back to being just Roy. Their small ranch house was their sanctuary, filled with the scent of her baking and the comfortable clutter of a life well lived together. Roy volunteered at the VFW, mentored at-risk youth and auto mechanics at the local high school, and generally kept a low profile, his past a carefully guarded secret known only to a select few in government databases. That Wednesday afternoon was ordinary. Roy was under his neighbor's old Chevy, doing an oil change as a favor. Linda had just returned from the grocery store, her arms laden with bags. The first sign of trouble was the screech of tires, too fast, too aggressive for their peaceful street. Before Roy could slide out from under the car, black tactical vans and armored vehicles swarmed Oakwood Drive, disgorging a dozen heavily armed SWAT officers in full tactical gear, helmets obscuring their faces, rifles at the ready. "Police! Search warrant! Everyone on the ground now!" a voice boomed through a megaphone. Roy emerged slowly, hands raised, grease still on his fingers, trying to process the sudden, overwhelming show of force. "There must be some mistake," he called out. A rifle barrel gestured him silent. "Down! On your face!" an officer yelled. Roy complied, the rough asphalt pressing against his cheek, the smell of diesel fumes filling his nostrils. He heard shouts, radio chatter, the heavy thud of boots surrounding him. His wrists were roughly zip-tied behind his back. Through the chaos, he heard an officer shout, "Target vehicle matches description. House secure." That's when Linda's car, a familiar blue sedan, pulled into their driveway. She stepped out, grocery bags in both arms, her face etched with confusion and fear as she saw her husband prone on the ground, surrounded by armed men. "Roy, what's happening?" 3 officers immediately pivoted towards her, weapons raised. "Police, drop the bags. Hands where we can see them." Linda froze, the paper bags clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. "Please, I don't understand." "She's not complying," a young officer, his voice cracking with adrenaline and youthful aggression, shouted. "Ma'am, final warning. Drop the bags." Linda, her arthritic hands trembling, began to lower the bags, but she wasn't moving fast enough for the amped-up officer. "Non-compliant subject," he yelled, then without further warning, raised his taser and fired. Roy heard the sickening crackle, saw Linda's body convulse as the electricity ripped through her. The grocery bags exploded across the driveway, eggs shattering, milk splashing, apples rolling under tactical boots. Linda collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, a small whimpering sound escaping her lips. A wave of cold fury washed over Roy, so intense it almost buckled him. But decades of Special Forces training, of maintaining absolute control in life or death situations, took over. He didn't scream, didn't struggle against his restraints. Instead, his mind went preternaturally calm, assessing, analyzing. He saw the young officer who had fired the taser, his face now a mixture of bravado and dawning horror. He saw the SWAT commander, older, more experienced, observing the scene with a frown. That was his target. "Let me up," Roy said, his voice quiet, but with an edge of command that cut through the surrounding noise, making several officers flinch. The commander hesitated for a split second, then gave a curt nod to a nearby officer who reluctantly cut Roy's zip ties. Roy rose slowly, deliberately to his feet. He didn't rush to Linda, though every fiber of his being screamed to do so. He knew the priorities. First, de-escalate the threat. First, regain control of the situation. He walked steadily towards the SWAT commander, ignoring the rifles still warily aimed in his direction. He stopped directly in front of him, looked him dead in the eye, and uttered 5 quiet, carefully enunciated words that hung in the suddenly chilled air. "Call General Rourke right now." The SWAT commander, a seasoned veteran named Captain Miller, blinked. The name spoken with such calm authority by this grease-stained, unassuming old man whose wife lay tasered on the driveway was utterly unexpected. "General Rourke?" Miller repeated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Who the hell is General Rourke to you, old man?" One of the younger SWAT officers snickered. "Yeah, save it, Grandpa. We're here for a major drug trafficker, Carlos El Martillo Ramirez. Got a warrant says he's holed up in this house." Roy didn't even glance at the younger officer. His gaze remained locked on Captain Miller. "This is 124 Oakwood Drive," Roy stated calmly. "Your warrant is likely for 124 Oakwood Avenue, different zip code, other side of the county. A common dispatcher error for this area." He paused. "General James Iron Jim Rourke, chairman of the Joint Special Operations Command. He and I go way back. You have 2 minutes to get him on your satellite phone before this situation escalates into a national security incident you can't even begin to comprehend. And while you're at it," Roy added, his voice dropping almost to a whisper, yet carrying more menace than any shout, "you might want to get a medic for my wife. She has a heart condition. If anything happens to her because of your cowboy's itchy trigger finger, General Rourke will be the least of your worries." Captain Miller stared at Roy, truly seeing him for the first time. The unwavering steel in his eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice, the almost preternatural calm in the face of overwhelming force. This wasn't the panicked rambling of an ordinary civilian. This was something else entirely. Doubt, cold and sharp, pierced Miller's professional composure. "Check that address, now," he barked into his radio. To another officer, "Get the medic over to the woman, stat." He looked back at Roy. "And if this is some kind of bluff, old man." "I don't bluff, Captain," Roy interrupted quietly. "Not with my wife's life on the line. Left breast pocket of my jacket. Carefully." Miller hesitated, then gestured for an officer to check. The officer cautiously reached into Roy's jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He opened it, then his eyes widened. He wordlessly handed it to Captain Miller. Inside, nestled beside a faded photo of a younger Roy and Linda, was a battered, nondescript military ID card. But it wasn't the ID itself that made Miller's blood run cold. It was the small, almost invisible Ankh symbol embossed in the corner, a symbol recognized only by those in the highest echelons of classified operations, denoting access and authority that superseded almost everything. "Black Ankh clearance," Miller breathed, the color draining from his face. He'd only ever seen it once before in a top-secret briefing years ago. It meant this man was practically a ghost, someone whose real name probably wasn't even on this ID, someone who answered only to the very highest levels. "Get me JSOC Command Priority Alpha now," Miller roared into his radio, his earlier skepticism replaced by raw panic. "Patch me through to General Rourke's personal satellite line. Tell them it's a code Black Ankh authentication. Field initiated." The entire SWAT team seemed to freeze. The term Black Ankh rippled through their comms, silencing all other chatter. Rifles were subtly, almost imperceptibly lowered. The young officer who had tasered Linda looked like he was about to throw up. He knew, with sickening certainty, that his career had just imploded. Roy, meanwhile, finally moved towards Linda, kneeling beside her as the team medic rushed over. He gently took her hand, his touch infinitely tender. "It's all right, sweetheart," he murmured. "It's going to be all right." His eyes, however, when he briefly glanced back at Captain Miller, were like chips of Arctic ice. The next 10 minutes were a blur of frantic activity and dawning horror for Captain Miller and his SWAT team. Dispatch confirmed the warrant address was indeed Oakwood Avenue. The target, Ramirez, had been apprehended there by another team 20 minutes earlier without incident. They had hit the wrong house. They had tasered the wife of a man who, according to the panicked, encrypted whispers now coming through Miller's earpiece from JSOC, was a national asset of the highest possible value, a legendary figure whose exploits were the stuff of hushed awe in clandestine circles. Then, General Rourke himself came on the line, his voice like gravel and thunder. Miller had never been dressed down so thoroughly, so coldly, so terrifyingly in his entire career. He stood stiffly, taking the verbal barrage. "Yes, General." "No, General." "I understand, General." "My profound apologies, General." When the call ended, Miller looked like a broken man. He approached Roy, who was still kneeling beside Linda, now conscious but disoriented and in pain, being attended by the medic. "Mr. Tanner? Sergeant Tanner." "Sir," Miller stammered, his face ashen. "There are no words. We made a catastrophic error. The address, your wife. On behalf of myself and my entire team, I offer our deepest, most sincere apologies." Roy slowly looked up, his eyes unyielding. "Apologies won't fix a potential heart arrhythmia, Captain. Apologies won't erase the terror your team inflicted on an innocent civilian in her own driveway. This," he gestured around at the heavily armed officers, the armored vehicles, "is not policing. This is an occupation force, and you, Captain, are a piss-poor commander for allowing it to happen." Before Miller could respond, the distinct thrum of heavy rotors filled the air. Two sleek, black, unmarked helicopters, the kind that didn't appear on civilian radar, descended rapidly, landing with practiced precision in the wide street, their downdraft whipping leaves and debris into a frenzy. Men in dark civilian suits carrying specialized equipment disembarked, moving with quiet, lethal efficiency. One of them, clearly in charge, approached General Rourke, who had, impossibly, also just arrived via one of the helicopters, looking every inch the four-star warrior, even in his slightly rumpled travel uniform. "Sergeant Tanner," General Rourke said, his voice rough with concern as he strode directly to Roy, completely ignoring Captain Miller and the SWAT team. He clasped Roy's shoulder firmly. "Are you and Linda all right, old friend?" "Linda's been tasered, Jim," Roy said, his voice flat, "by that trigger-happy recruit over there." He nodded towards the young officer, who flinched as if struck. Rourke's eyes, already hard, turned to granite. He didn't even speak to the young officer. He just looked at him. And in that look, the young man saw his future, or lack thereof. The arrival of General Rourke and the unmarked federal team effectively ended the SWAT team's involvement. The suited agents, clearly from a very specialized, very discreet agency, took over. They facilitated Linda's immediate transport via one of the black helicopters to the nearest top-tier cardiac hospital for a full evaluation, with Roy by her side. General Rourke stayed behind to liaise with Captain Miller and the local police chief, who had arrived looking like he'd seen a ghost. The liaison was reportedly brief, brutal, and resulted in Captain Miller being immediately suspended. The young officer who fired the taser facing a full internal affairs and likely criminal investigation, and the entire SWAT unit being stood down pending a top-to-bottom review by federal observers. The wrong address, the excessive force, the tasering of an elderly woman, the involvement of a black ink operative. It was a perfect storm of procedural failure and catastrophic misjudgment. Roy Tanner's 5 words had not just frozen a SWAT team, they had triggered a systemic earthquake that would ripple through local law enforcement and echo in very quiet, very high-level offices in Washington, D.C. for a long time to come. Linda, thankfully, was found to have no lasting cardiac damage from the taser, though she was badly bruised, shaken, and deeply traumatized. Roy stayed by her side, his quiet strength her anchor. They returned to their small ranch house a few days later, the driveway scrubbed clean of spilled groceries but not of the memory. General Rourke visited them personally, not as a general, but as Jim, an old friend, offering support, ensuring they had everything they needed, including discreet top-level security until any potential blowback from the Ramirez cartel, who might mistakenly think Roy was involved in the raid on their actual safe house, was neutralized. Roy Tanner never sought the spotlight. He had simply reacted to protect his wife, and then, to protect them both from a situation spiraling out of control, he had spoken 5 words, a key to a door few knew existed. He went back to fixing lawnmowers and mentoring kids, the quiet hero of Oakwood Drive. But the local police department and its SWAT team would never forget the day they raided the wrong house and encountered a legend whose quiet voice carried more weight than all their weapons combined. Because true authority isn't about tactical gear and shouted commands. It's about a lifetime of proven courage, integrity, and knowing exactly who to call when things go catastrophically wrong. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in the quiet strength of heroes and that 5 words can indeed change everything.